Welcome on board for today's webinar. Topic is change of use of real estate, how to optimize a property. We're today focusing on the Polish market. My name is Peter Oberlechner. I'm partner in the real estate team of Vienna, Theiss. And I'm sitting here together with my friend and partner Tomasz Stasiak, who is heading our Polish office. Tomasz is an expert in real estate and construction law, very experienced lawyer on the Polish market and very familiar with market trends and developments in Poland as well. Now, why have we chosen this topic? COVID-19 has led to and increased developments that have been going on maybe anyhow in the real estate world, but that have increased in pace and in speed on grounds of this pandemic crisis. We see tectonic shifts in terms of demand patterns for and behavioral patterns for real estate use. It's no secret that many hotels are now empty since the crisis started. Now the question is whether and how quick they will be filled up again once we can travel freely again. Some predict that we will soon be back at the levels we were before the crisis. Others have a more cautious assessment of this situation and tell us that it will take a very long time for travel levels to be at the pre-crisis levels, if at all. Many travelers who used to travel a lot are now working online. Business meetings are substituted with online meetings, similar to the ones that we have now. And that helps companies to save on travel expenses, and that offers more convenient possibilities to meet in the virtual world. Another trend is the rapid development of online retail as opposed to brick and mortar retail. Also here, some of the changes may reverse when people can again freely move to shopping centers without wearing masks and having their leisure and food convenience also there. But clearly, some of what is now shifting into online will remain there. And retail spaces will look different in the future. That's for sure. They may be smaller. Brands are vanishing or have stopped their expansion. Also here, it will take a long time for things to come back to where they were, if at all. Offices, people and companies are moving consciously into home office. It helps to save travel time. It helps to save employers on costs in various respects. It's a convenience for people who are able to work from home and have their families. So office sizes may be considerably smaller than they were in the past. Now, all of this leads to the question, how will the current uses of real estate that we have change in future? Looking ahead, I think we may have some considerable changes ahead of us. Whoever now develops real estate has to think and will think, I think, more flexible, having gone through the experience that we have gone through now for the past year. And owners of real estate are already in the process, I think, to consider to use their properties differently than they use them in many instances. We have various trends here on the market that are well researched already by research. Now, maybe that's a good starting point for our discussion here to ask you how it is with you and your experience. Monica, I think we have some questions here to ask our audience in this respect. It would be interesting for us to learn what your personal forecast is for which type of property you would see the greatest need to find new, different, or additional uses for the future. We've categorized them the usual way into retail, hotel, office, logistics, and residential. And yeah, so what's your personal view? Where do you think that the shifts that I spoke about would happen, could happen in the future? For which types you would see the greatest need or the greatest the greatest need for changes?
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. I think this topic would be interesting even if there was no pandemic and no COVID-19. I think what's worth to mention is that the Polish real estate market is just 30 years old, and we just see that some of the developments that have been implemented in 90s came to their let's say moral end. They are no longer placed in right location. They should be removed, and the use of the land could be materially improved. So despite COVID, I think we saw already that, let's say, some of the office buildings, the eldest ones, would potentially be replaced with other uses. Given where the market is probably with residential use. We saw, as you mentioned, the retail centers to become obsolete. We didn't see yet like vast change like we had in the UK, where shopping center be changed into logistics centers. But our team, we participate recently in a transaction where basically retailer were selling a major shop, whereas the buyer was very express about changing it into last mile logistics. So those trends are in Poland. They may have a nature of a major redevelopment, as maybe just demolition and just building completely new residential areas. But what we can also see, often the owners would like to do like a change of use with a minimum investment, and the questions they ask, they are about changing, let's say, office building into sort of residential. I'm saying sort of because of the zoning requirements, which we'll mention later. But we also saw investors very much interested in ready for rent, who at the same time want to have a flexibility of selling individual apartment in the future. And from legal perspective, this step, which sounds rather simple, may be very complex, again, in terms of zoning and technical requirements for such projects.
Well, thank you, Tomasz. Maybe now just a brief recap, results of our little poll that I hope you saw it. It's in the chat function. Interestingly, only few of you think that for hotels, you see great need for change of use in the future. You see that more for REIT, at least the ladies and gentlemen that we have present in this webinar, see the need more given for retail and for office. No need for logistics, no need for residential to think of a change of use in the future. Now, switching kind of now to the concrete kind of issues of Polish law, Tomasz, when you consider the legal circumstances that you operate under, how is it under Polish law possible for an owner of a given building, when he thinks that his change of use would be useful of his current real estate, can he do that freely? Or are there legal boundaries for under Polish law for changing the current use of a building?
Mm-hmm. From a legal perspective, the use of building is mainly determined by the building permit documentation. The regulations change over the years many times, but building permit design was always determining the general purpose of a building as well as purposes of individual areas within. And what was following was adjusting areas and the building to the technical requirements applicable by law. So you have basically two basic aspects you have to take into account, which is what your building permit design says about potential use of the building and what technical solutions were applied at the time for construction, and are they consistent with your new way of using. The third element, for which I could probably move the slide to next one, is of course zoning. Always when you consider change of use of material part of the building, you have to consider what is the zoning, what are the zoning requirements applicable to your building.
Right. I mean, when you, Tomasz, now thinking about the process that you have for building permits, is this a lengthy exercise, or is this something that works informally with authorities? How is the reality?
Well, it really depends how far you want to go with the change of use. Assuming what you plan is within the zoning, let's say zoning accepted area, you may still distinguish three situations. One would be basically you want to build something completely different, in which case you need to demolish existing building and then apply for relevant permits for a new one. You may actually leave material parts of the building and do just redevelopment, in which case, again, assuming you follow the zoning requirements, you may actually avoid going for building permit. And then the third solution, which is the most, let's say, flexible, but I would say untested in terms of practices in larger scale, is that when basically you want to leave the building more or less untouched from the external, but what you want to achieve is internal changes, or what you want to implement are the internal changes, and then following change of use, which actually may not require notification of construction works, but just pure notification of the change of use to the authority. So in summary, the process may differ, really depending on how far you want to go. But coming back to your original question, I think if the zoning is right, I would say the building process can be still affected by the neighbors, by environmental organizations, etc. So I think it would be fair to say that 6 months is a minimum period of obtaining, or more realistically, it would be probably something like 12 months.
When you consider the regulations in force, are they federal? Are they kind of the same all throughout Poland, or are they very much locally fractionalized? And for instance, we in Austria, we have 9 different federal states, Bundesländer, and they all have different building codes in place, which have by large, of course, they are similar, but there are important details to note that one has to be aware of when he does development or when he does redevelopment. How is this situation in Poland?
Mhm. Well, Poland is a unified country. We don't have regions, self-governing regions. So the building code is, there's one building code for entire country. There is the general provisions of law regulating the technical conditions that building must follow, etc. However, local bodies, self-governmental bodies also have influence over the process, being responsible for adopting master plans. Master plans that, as I said at the beginning, are the key for defining what you can and what you cannot do. This is one of the key competences of local bodies, and just from more philosophical perspective, one of the areas where the self-government manifests all its best and worst when actually adopting those plans. Then there is a certain degree of discretionary in the permitting process, where basically authorities may say that change of use may be, for example, harmful to neighbors, or maybe, I don't know, worsening the conditions of historical monuments. So there are some aspects where local government can affect your project, and definitely you need good contact with the local authorities if you want to implement projects smoothly. But the rules do not differ between various parts of Poland.
Now thinking of master plans, Tomasz, I assume, of course, that when your project or your redevelopment is covered by the master plan, you don't have to care too much. Well, of course, you have to think of your building permit, that all the requirements are fulfilled there and all the boxes are ticked, and so that you can do your thing. How, when a project that you're intending to do or a redevelopment would not be possible under a current master plan when it requires a change? Do you, as an individual or as an organization or as a developer, have the right, a formal right, to request or institute other proceedings for the change of a master plan, or are you completely depending on basically on the willingness of the authorities to do so?
Mm-hmm. I think we have two basic scenarios and one scenario which I mentioned, but it's not really being used. First of all, you must remember that master plans are not covering 100% of Polish cities. So it often happens that, in fact, your building is not covered by any master plan, and then you, as an individual owner interested in redevelopment or change of use, you simply apply for individual decision, being called zoning decision, which sets zoning conditions. And then, yes, this is individual decision, so actually you as the owner have the right to apply for it, influence its content, and appeal if you don't like it. On the bad side, your neighbors have the right as well. Where there is a master plan, this competence is entirely with the self-governing bodies, and you as an individual, you don't have any legal right to initiate the process, although you can influence your representative in the local council to actually take care of it. Or what is more practical from the institutional investor's perspective, you just try to negotiate with the mayor, basically showing him what are the benefits for the local community, and actually trying to achieve his support for implementing changes. Then once the local council decides to start the process, which unfortunately is lengthy, then individuals can influence the process, whether by formal applications and various filings expressing their wishes for the property, or by more informal way by basically talking to representative in local council.
Mm-hmm. What has become, I would say, to a certain extent, fashionable in at least speaking clearly about regions such as Austria or also Germany, where there is even federal legislation for this, is basically the thought that to change the zoning or to change the master plan could be a win-win situation for both sides, actually, when the general public gets something from kind of the step that it takes to rezone a property. And then there is the idea of contracts in this respect, urban planning contracts, as you could translate the concept into English, where the developer and the public body in charge of the master plan, basically, or the zoning plan, enter into an agreement whereby the conditions are set, very simply speaking, to change the zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And the takeaway for the general public then is that, for instance, the investor would be obliged to do something for the roads, to create a park, I mean, just thinking of this is applied, of course, only for large-scale projects, or to have to build a kindergarten, or to commit a certain percentage of the apartments that he creates for social housing, things like that. Are there similar possibilities under Polish law?
We discuss this type of solutions for many years, and there was always a feeling that there may be a room for extortion by the authorities against developers. So finally, there is a concept of road agreement, which basically regulates the investment into road system. Very often developers basically are building the roads, or even reimburse the city with the cost of the confiscation of land necessary for roads. And this concept of the road agreement is rather widespread. We have two more situations where this type of urban development agreement are possible. One is recently introduced to Polish system concept of revitalization of the degraded urban areas. Basically, when city council decides a certain area is subject to revitalization, which also means undertaking to invest in this area, then the law permits for agreements between the local authorities and the developer, on the basis of which the parties agree who will be doing what. Maybe developer building some social services infrastructure, and the city being responsible for operating it. By now, I haven't heard of any case of such agreement actually being used on a wider scale. But this is probably because the regulations are relatively fresh. The second case where also the urban land the agreement is possible, special law that been introduced to promote residential development in Poland. Basically, according to this law, the residential development is possible on areas where master plan does not provide for the residential development. The law was specifically designated for post-industrial land, but actually can be used also in not only for the post-industrial land. And basically concept is that the residential developer can propose to the authorities that despite of the conditions of a master plan, the developer proposes a wider development of residential character, and then the local council may first, by special resolution, approve the project regardless of the conditions of the zoning, but then subject to the developer agreeing to certain what we call urban standard, making sure that all the necessary services are available for the future users of the residential developments. And if such resolution is adopted, there also an urban land development agreement is possible. So this sounds like very reasonable mechanism, but to be honest, there were a lot of political controversies when it was adopted, and despite various tries by the developers, I haven't heard of any such resolution being adopted in Poland by now. It always seems that the expectation of the local authorities are going too far in terms of the social services, and at the end of the day, the developers are not ready to basically cover the cost. But let's see how this develops.
Yeah. So probably as a kind of a bottom line, we can say that when somebody wants to do something that is out of when there is a zoning plan, and I would assume that most of the large urban areas are covered by zoning plans, when somebody wants to do something that is outside of what the current zoning provides, he or she will always depend very much on the goodwill of the authorities at the end of the day to be allowed to do so, to find a way to do so. But there is not a clear legal path to this end that offers safety or protection. Is that fair to say that?
Theory says that if you are within the zoning requirements, they are just the technical details that you must reflect in your design, and therefore the building permit should be granted. Practice, especially in big cities where you have to combine interest of various infrastructure providers, etc., the practice is more complex. But to put it in certain context, Peter, since we collect experiences from various countries in CE, I think that Poland is actually in a rather good shape in terms of transparency in the process. I heard about countries, without naming, that you need to get like 60 various permits to get your building permit, and those 60 permits are governed by 12 various ministers. So I think we are not yet there. So our developers should be, let's say, relatively comfortable with our system.
Maybe Tomasz, you could briefly rewind one slide, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Just another point that I'd like to touch upon is the question. Now, assuming you have a given use of a property, let's say, I mean, you have, for instance, retail, and you want to convert it into housing. Just, a fictitious example. You have a shopping center that is no longer functional, and you want to, at least in part of it, build apartments. Or other scenario, you have a hotel in the middle of a city where you think that catered apartments might be a good idea, serviced apartments might be a good idea. and you have them converted into apartments. Now, when looking at the different current uses of real estate, is it with respect of certain category switches, are some easier? Are others more problematic from a legal viewpoint? Or is it basically all the same? Are always the same? Is there always the same degree of, I would say, care and the same procedural steps to be obeyed? Or is it possible to obtain easier recategorization when you do certain things and you don't do other things?
Mhm. Okay, let's start maybe from the easier example, which is the hotel, which you want to transform into a service apartment. This seems rather easy. The hotels and service apartments fall into the same category under the zoning regulations. In principle, these are all services. The local authorities, when adopting a master plan, of course, can go deeper and formulate the zoning requirements in a way that this will not be so easy. But let's talk about like a model example. So the hotel and service apartments, we may say that fall into the same zoning category. Then the next step will be to consider, will my investment require environmental permit? Is my investment fall into the category that require environmental impact assessment? I guess no. I mean, you don't need to build additional parking. You have a hotel. It already had some parking or parking solutions, which probably can be used also for the purpose of your service apartments. So then you think about next element. What type of construction changes do I have to do? I already know that I don't have to change the shape. I don't want to add a floor. I don't need to add something. I mean, let's say that it's a hotel that there is a lift and there will be no requirement to add a lift. So let's say I don't need to do any external works. Probably well, let's put it differently, but maybe I need to do some structural changes in the building. If I need to do some structural changes in the building, this means I need to prepare full building documentation. But the good thing is that because this is redevelopment, I don't have to go for a building permit. It's sufficient that I basically notify the authorities that I will be doing the works. The authorities can actually reply opposing me doing the works on the basis that maybe my evaluation of the works was wrong. Maybe actually I'm doing something that is outside the scope, something that requires building permit. But in principle, if I don't touch the outside parameters of the building, I'm not within the monumental protection area, I don't have to go for a building permit. And then there is the third element, the third potential solution, which is the easiest. If I don't do any structural changes, if I'm just basically, I don't know, I'm just tearing down the partitioning walls and just introduce light walls inside, just to change the shapes of the rooms, etc., then most likely I will not have to go for a notification at all. I will just notify the authorities that basically I'm changing the use of the building. Authorities, again, they have some time to, I think it's actually 30 days to object my notification and tell me, no, this is not permitted because, but they have to justify then their review. And basically I do the works. So the system gives various options, which depending what exactly you want to do, you can use. And the fact that some of the changes can be introduced without formal building permit actually opens great opportunities for the developers. Now, switching to the more difficult example, which is the shopping center and residential. Well, starting point would be these are completely different two types of uses. So immediately the zoning question comes, what the master plan says, or maybe there is no zoning plan. then we have to go for the zoning conditions. If the shopping center stands in the center of a residential area, probably zoning conditions for residential redevelopment would not be that difficult. If we have them, then there is a question: what works I have to do? Do I want to completely rebuild the building, or maybe by any chance the shopping center being built in a form of let's say almost residential building? So we then go through the checklist again. Am I doing the structural changes? So if I'm doing structural changes, I have to prepare full documentation and then present it to authorities, wait a period during the authorities can object, and if they don't object, I can implement. This is assuming we are not changing the shape. Probably in shopping center versus residential, you actually have to do the structural works. It's not that easy like in the case of hotel. But so what I'm really saying is you have at least 3 layers or 3 different rules depending on the scope of the works that you want to implement. And hotel to service apartments seems easy. I think offices into sort of residential could be also easy, if only from business perspective it makes sense with current competition.
Mm-hmm. Now, allow me maybe, thank you, Tomasz, at this point, maybe to ask our audience another question that could be of interest, at least for us. And this is the question of whether or not you are at this point of time concretely involved into a conversion or change of use type of situation. I'm aware of the fact that some of our visitors today are from the financial industries, and this, of course, would relate to the fact of whether or not you would be concerned with financing aspects of such a conversion. Now, you see the poll in the chat function, and I would just like to invite you to provide a brief click on either yes or no. I mean, some of you decided not to answer the question. We have some yeses and some nos. Yes, clearly, I mean, the other interesting question would be to ask, but we haven't prepared, whether you expect to have to deal with such a situation in future. But this is really kind of just a look into the crystal ball. Well, thank you very much. I think the bottom line, Tomasz, also here is when my takeout of what you said is, within a given zoning, I think there is essentially it's an even playing ground basically for changes of use. You have to. It cannot be said that one or the other is easier or more difficult. The problems arise clearly when you are on thin ice, when you are kind of testing the boundaries of a zoning plan, or when you do something that is outside of the current master plan. I think then things become more tricky, which is, I think, in line with what applies elsewhere as well, which leads us to the question of concrete timing for any of the steps that we had discussed. What is, Tomasz, could you give a brief overview of timing aspects of any such recategorizations?
Yes. Well, obviously we have COVID times, and all the timing can differ materially depending on how authorities are working. We had some very encouraging examples of the last 12 months, but we have some very discouraging examples of the months where basically authorities said, we are working from home, we don't have files, we cannot issue a permit. But assume, I mean, leaving COVID apart, I would basically say that if we have to go for a change of a master plan, then it's completely unknown. It's probably really depends where in Poland, which local government, how skilled we are, how we can present the project to the local authorities. But if we are not talking about the change of a master plan, but let's say the longest procedure, which involves environmental permit, the zoning decision, and then the building permit, I would probably say that it's something between 12 months to 24 months that can be achieved by skilled developer. If we talk about a situation where we don't need to get environmental permit, and maybe we just do the notification of construction works because we don't change the shape of the building and we don't add anything to it, we don't add floor, then I think the preparation of an entire documentation and having the ability to start is something like 6 months, with maybe some complication 9 months, because the documentation must be prepared. But generally, I would say something like 6 months. And then the simplest case where we basically don't touch any structural elements, we just do change the partitioning, etc. Then, well, the law says 30 days for the authorities to object, but of course there are some preparatory works. I would say 3 months before you can start.
That sounds all, I would say, quite reasonable, measured with also with international yardsticks. Of course, the change to the master plan, that's an entirely different story, but there is, of course, no predefined legal process for this that gives you any what is called subjective rights in anything. So it's clear that you will always depend on your ability to cooperate with authorities. I mean, maybe to draw a kind of a summary line under all that we discussed, Tomasz, are there any other important aspects that you would like to mention to somebody who is kind of considering about changing the use of current categorizations or building permits in Poland?
I think there's one point that I want to make to make everyone aware. Obviously, there are many projects which are suspended at the moment at various stages. Obviously, if the construction was advanced when COVID started, then most likely the construction is now completed because nobody wanted to stop the process. But there may be cases where there is land, there is a permit, and developers feel temptation to actually save time by starting one construction, and in the meantime change the building permit into something else, maybe at the foundation stage. So basically they had a permit for let's say office building, they realize it doesn't make business sense anymore, so they go to authorities and they ask for a change to existing building permit by doing a residential building. It is not written in the books, but basically there is a clear line of court decisions that do not allow for this type of change. So if developer basically thinks about this type of change, I would suggest to the audience to go to lawyers. Here we are, Theiss. Basically, be careful. the courts were always saying that change to building permit cannot change the substance of what you try to build. This is not the route. If the intention really is to build something else with different designation, well, either you build what you have a permit for and you take the risk of repurposing afterwards, or you just basically give up on the building permit and try to receive a new one.
Mm-hmm.
The middle way would be risky for everyone.
Okay, I think that's a very useful point to make. Well, I think there is no open questions that we have in our chat function. Should you have any questions, probably particularly to Tomasz?
Well, then maybe I have one question, and I hope Monica is prepared for this one. How would you repurpose the Palace of Culture?
That's an insider joke, Tomasz, clearly, I think, for people who know the cityscape of Warsaw and who love it.
I think we had a lot of discussions about actually removing Palace of Culture from Warsaw, but let's see that we don't remove it. How we could repurpose it so it's be better used.
So to be clear, I think Wolf Theiss doesn't have a say on that. So we are not in an official function. We're asking out of curiosity. And clearly this is not meant serious, because I think a concrete repurposing is not considered, Tomasz, is it?
Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah. Well, what it shows, I think, that sometimes for the locals, things are worse than for visitors, because clearly for every tourist, I would say, and for every business visitors like myself, the Palace of Culture is an interesting historical monument of a given area that, of course, I mean, you don't look at in fondness. Okay, let's see whether we have good ideas here. Well, it seems that the preferred repurposing would be a hotel. Not a bad idea. And some residential. No shopping center needed in addition. Okay, so that allows you, Tomasz, to maybe suggest an amendment of the local zoning plan and to give the city government something to think about. I see no open questions in our chat function, which means that we have managed to, despite actually my kind of speaking in silent mode at beginning, to stay within the predefined time frame. Thank you very much for everybody's attention. And should there be concrete questions, topics, issues that you would want to follow up with following up this webinar, of course, you know where to reach us, and we'd be happy to continue discussing with you on an individual basis. Thank you very much for your attention and have a good day. Goodbye.
Much. Bye-bye.